This presentation describes research on managing scientific information about infectious diseases. This work builds on our Apollo project, which is funded by the National Institute of General Medical Sciences. The goal of Apollo is to make disease transmission models more useful in public health practice. Apollo uses an ontology to standardize terminology used to configure models, and it uses web services to make models more accessible. Here, we see a simple end-user application that uses Apollo to run disease transmission models. On the left, we see the inputs for a model that is simulating an influenza A H1N1 epidemic. When we click Run Epidemic Simulator, the application sends this input information to the Apollo service, which routes it to one or more user-selected simulators. Our current work seeks to help researchers find and reuse information with which they construct and initialize disease transmission models. To initialize a model, a researcher must find information about the incidence of disease and immunity, the disease and disease control options. Constructing the model itself requires information about the population, its environment, and inventory and logistics related to control measures. Similar information management problems exist in other scientific fields that construct causal models from observational and experimental data about the world. Therefore, our work may find general application. Important to a solution, these fields make ontological commitments. They choose which aspects of reality to represent and which to ignore. These commitments, just like shared theories and models, offer significant leverage for organizing information in a field. Our approach recognizes the importance of reusable information. Thus, we created an Apollo library that curates and stores information codified in Apollo terminology and syntax. The library allows information to be reused when configuring a disease transmission model. To help researchers find information, we created OBC.id, an ontology-based catalog that indexes datasets, publications, models, and Apollo library items. The Apollo library and OBC.id use web services to interoperate with each other and with end-user applications. Apollo codified information is curated before it is stored in the Apollo library. The curation process begins when an end-user application submits an instance of an Apollo type, such as a vaccination control measure. The application is responsible for annotating the instance with terms defined by the Apollo ontology. The Apollo library stores this item as a Java object in a DB4O database. It then creates an Apollo curated library item containing the DB4O unique universal ID and a timestamp, and stores it as well. OBC.id uses the Apollo curated library item as the basis for indexing an item. Our method for ontology-based indexing of information combines the Apollo SV application ontology with a domain ontology. The domain ontology is an upper-level ontology of population biology. We link this domain ontology to the application ontology by linking ecosystem to geographical region, population to community, and ecosystem to the material entity class in the basic formal ontology. These links establish transitive relationships among publications, disease transmission models, Apollo curated library items, and datasets. We manually index publications, datasets, and models. For example, to index the Hong Kong H1N1 transmission study dataset, we first created an instance of the dataset class to represent the Hong Kong dataset. We then asserted that the Hong Kong dataset is about the human population of Hong Kong. OBC.id uses the same ontology-based method to index curated Apollo library items, but it does so automatically from the information in a curated Apollo library item. We next demonstrate information retrieval by OBC.id. OBC.id supports retrieval of datasets, models, publications, and Apollo library items by location, ecosystem division, and infectious disease. Here, we search for all cataloged information about infectious disease in the United States. We can see a summary of an Apollo library item or the computer interpretable coded information. The application created and ran a Sparkle query based on our selections. There are also one-click queries that retrieve all available information about topics of current focus, such as influenza A, H7N9. The Apollo library supports context-sensitive querying. Here, we have just run a simulation for influenza A H1N1 in Allegheny County without a control measure. We now right-click on Control Measures, which generates an object query directly to the Apollo library. The query returns a list of control measures for this disease in this location and allows us to review a control measure, and then right-click on it to add it to the simulator input. We can now run simulations of this scenario with the control measure. The closely related OBC.id and the Apollo library show how the combination of a domain ontology and an application ontology for a causal model can be used to organize diverse scientific information. These methods may find application in other fields with causal models that explain observational and experimental data. Finally, a potential application of our approach is discovery. Causal models, domain ontologies, and experimental data are the basis of discovery. The associational links created among them by ontological indexing can be used, for example, to find models for which sufficient data exist for their construction, but which have never been built. There is more information about this project at code.google.com/p/Apollo.